Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of the AnandTech podcast. I'm your host Ian Cuttress, and joining me today is our news editor Anton Shilov.
Hello guys.
Now Anton and I this week have been at Computex, the annual computer show here in Taiwan. We're currently sitting in our hotel room with a very large system testing a upcoming Intel processor, which we'll talk about later. But this week we've been running from meeting to meeting, trying to get the news out to you guys of everything we can find. Now, this show, when we decided to come, we weren't expecting much, were we?
Well, considering the fact that when no big announcements supposed to be made, no, we didn't have a lot of expectations. However, both Intel and AMD excited us with their new high-end desktop platforms.
Yeah, well, this show definitely wasn't more about products being announced today. It was all about stuff that's coming later in the year, I think.
Yes, that's for sure, with exception of this process you were just talking about.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a bit. But so first of all, I want to start talking about actually what was our most read article this week on AnandTech, and that's relating to these new extreme workstation processors that are coming to market. Now, as Anton said, we've got one from AMD and one from Intel, and the AMD news was by far the most read article that we had on site. And AMD's new part just belongs to this extreme workstation family that just now happens to exist. Now, previously, when we've had workstation parts before, these are high TDP, high core count parts, but really aimed just at the people who need additional compute, sort of semi-professionals.
Well, back in the day, workstations used to be actually light servers. Today, the situation is changing. So instead of using Xeon or EPYC processors for workstations, both Intel and AMD actually introduce completely separate parts, which also tend to have extreme core count, but also support overclocking. The downside, however, is that they lack things like ECC, vPro, and, well, multi-socket support. But at the same time, I'm not sure that anyone needs dual socket in the workstation world nowadays.
It's the idea is that some of the enterprisey type features are cut out of these processors, so Intel and AMD aren't cannibalizing some of their server market with just having this high-end workstation part. However, extreme workstation is different. It's, workstation on steroids. And the first, the main news we want to talk about essentially is AMD's Threadripper 2 announcement. So last year, AMD announced and released Threadripper. This was a 16 cores using the TR4 socket, which was based on the EPYC Enterprise socket, and 4 channels of memory, lots of PCIe lanes, kind of shook the high-end desktop market to its core. And we went from a market which had gone slowly up from 4, 6, 8, 10 cores, now to a market that had 16 cores. And speaking with AMD, the 1950X, the 16-core part, was by far and away the most sold Threadripper processor. Everybody wanted the high core counts. So 1 year later, Intel has already launched their second generation Ryzen processors using Zen Plus microarchitecture on GlobalFoundries 12 nanometer. And now it's time to talk about updates to Threadripper using the new microarchitecture on 12 nanometer. And we get Threadripper 2. So the headline is all about cores. Threadripper going from 16 up to the top SKU having 32 cores. That's 64 threads using AMD simultaneous multi-threading. And there'll be a 24 core part as well. AMD at the show said, well, here's a demo. We looked in the slides afterwards and the demo was running at 3 gigahertz with a 3.4 gigahertz boost, but we're told that's still a work in progress. So with the new Zen Plus microarchitecture, we have better cache latencies, faster DRAM support. We tested the second generation Ryzen over first generation Ryzen and saw a 3% IPC increase. So we expect to see the same thing on Threadripper too, but against Threadripper.
But at a cost of rather extreme TDP.
Oh yeah, TDP goes up. So in the 16 core parts, we saw TDP of 180. But now with the Threadripper 2, we know that the TDP is about 250 watts. Now that would make it far and away AMD's highest TDP
For
consumer-related product, right? Because you remember the FX 9590?
Yes, but it was mainly aimed at overclockers who wanted maximum megahertz, who wanted to run them at maximum speeds. But now the new Threadripper 2 is evidently not about frequency, but about the core count.
So back in the day, that FX 9590 was 8 of the, Vishera Bulldozer-based cores. The idea is that it running at peak 5 gigahertz and consume 220 watts. So for a bit more power, we're getting higher performance x86 cores and 4 times as many.
Yeah,
probably going to be at lower frequency still, but that's a nice trade-off.
Well, if you actually need that many cores, yes. But then again, if you actually need 32 cores, you will never look at the FX, at the old FX.
No. So these 250 watts now, it sounds like a lot. We were told by the partners that this is actually a very conservative number. Most chips probably won't even need 250 watts. They'll come in a lot lower, and it gives AMD a bit of headroom. The way AMD counts its TDP is also a little different, and it's based on the ambient temperature and the thermal efficiency of the cooler and such. But we expect 250 to be, a very conservative number. That being said, we were told that some motherboards that currently exist in the market might have trouble with these processors if you overclock them because of their intense power draw. As a result, we see new motherboards from MSI and Gigabyte. The MSI one, the X399 MEG creation thing, had 19 power phases. That's 16 for the processor and 3 for the SoC part. So yeah, there's going to be new high-end X399 refresh motherboards for this. However, it is backwards compatible with current X399. You will be able to run them, just, a few of them you might not be able to overclock as much.
And keep in mind that you will also need a new cooler because of the higher TDP.
Yeah, so AMD is promoting their new Threadripper cooler, which is a massive new air cooler designed for 250 watts. Though unlike, the mainstream Ryzen processors that get bundled with a nice cooler, this Threadripper will actually be a separate available purchase. Cooler Master are making it, and Cooler Master will sell it through their distribution channels. Like I say, it's a massive beast, but it will probably come in, somewhere around $70 to $100 when it hits retail. We saw a lot of coolers on the show floor that actually built for the TR2 socket, designed with a wider base as well. So there's going to be plenty of options available on the market for whatever cooling you want. So Threadripper 1 had 4 memory channels. Threadripper 2 also has 4 memory channels. Now, Threadripper 1 used a 4 silicon die package where 2 of those dies were active and 2 were
disabled,
or dead, blank, whatever you want to call it. But in order to get up to 32, now all 4 dies are active. Now, in the Threadripper 1, you had the 2 active dies, each had access to 2 memory channels. With the new 32 core, you've still got 2 dies having access to direct access to memory channels, and the 2 now active dies don't have direct access to any memory channels. So that means that those dies will have, an additional 50 nanoseconds of latency when trying to access main memory. AMD doesn't think this will be much of an issue, except for the most memory-bound tasks.
But then again, if you have a memory-bound task, you may probably want to run Epic instead of Threadripper 2.
That was kind of AMD's argument. All that being said, we spoke about AMD and the Windows scheduler especially. Those secondary dies won't actually kick in until you hit 17 threads or 33 threads anyway. So it will populate the cores on the dies with access to the memory channels first, which kind of makes sense. The CPUs will be, like I said, overclockable. Still waiting on final frequencies, still waiting on final price, still waiting on final release date. We were told Q3, we expect it to be around August. because it was launched kind of August last year. So very soon we're going to be start trying to get in some of the processors and some of the new motherboards to test. So in terms of actual performance, the go-to benchmark on this is Cinebench, which 1950X scored about 3,000, and this is double the core with slightly higher IPC, but probably slightly lower clocks. So expect this to score about 6,000 Cinebench points. It's sticking 32 cores into the consumer market, even though it is extreme workstation market. Yeah, probably wouldn't have predicted it 2-3 years ago, right?
Definitely not.
But you'll read reviews on AnandTech as and when we get the chips. I'm hopeful that we'll get them as soon as we can. So the other major announcement in the extreme workstation space was from Intel in a very interesting, I don't know, maybe interesting is the wrong word, demo, where during Intel's keynote, they showed off a 28-core processor with all cores running at 5 gigahertz. Now, so technically on this announcement, we were pre-briefed. I got a pre-brief a few days before, though I was told that this would be a tech showcase. This is something we've been working in the lab and we want to show it off on stage.
And then all of a sudden, they said, coming in Q4.
Yeah, so we weren't expecting it to be announced as an actual product. For Gregory Bryant, who's SVP and GM of client computing, to come out and say, this 28-core processor is coming out in Q4 was a shock. Now, so I don't have an actual recording of the presentation. He said it is coming in Q4. He didn't say that 5 gigahertz was coming in Q4.
Yes, that's for sure.
Which was a bit of confusion in the press. Now, it was, if you look at it, it's very obvious that 28 cores for Intel at 5 gigahertz isn't going to be anywhere near manageable. And to that extent, looking back at the images of the press event, it was clear that the processor was overclocked. Despite the fact that it was very difficult to actually see in the case that they presented because it was dark. And speaking with Intel afterwards, actually they were meant to say that the system was overclocked, but
for some reason they have forgotten to do so.
Yeah, they said, you can take this as, trying to rescue the story after the fact, or this actually as, a genuine mistake of not saying overclocked. A lot of people, post the presentation said, well, it was obvious it was overclocked. Well, there's a difference when a company says, explicitly one thing, so it no longer becomes a question. Everybody kind of guessed it was overclocked, but Intel kind of had to have said it was overclocked, really. Otherwise, people definitely saw it as a presentation that was kind of masking what exactly they were showing. I think if they said it was a tech showcase, it perhaps would have just been, everybody would have been taken away.
Yeah, and keep in mind that overclocking an extreme core count CPU to 5 gigahertz is takes a lot of expertise. So if Intel can do it, they certainly deserve kudos for that.
The question is, how many chips did they have to go through to get it?
Well, a lot of them, but
probably, yes.
Then again, since we're talking about extreme workstations, which is a 1% of the 1%, then you can certainly go through, say, 50 chips and find a gem.
Well, so we got a chance to see the system the next morning. And on the stage, Intel said that they had both ASUS and Gigabyte working on this project, and able to get 5 gigahertz. What Intel didn't say is that apparently only Gigabyte's board was able to actually hit the 5 gigahertz. But the next morning, we got a chance to see the motherboard and the system used, and I think quite importantly, we got to see the cooling used, because a lot of people looked at the pictures that were dark, saying, well, is this a single phase cooler, which is essentially a sub-zero cooler, which is not going to be in anybody's home. What they were using, in fact, was a water chiller. Now, if you know about aquariums, you know about cold water fish having to need chilled water to survive. Essentially, what they used was a massive water chiller. And when I say massive, The company they used, Halia, their water chillers have been on the market for years. I used to have one for testing, and I sold it a few years ago. What they had was their second highest unit, which was the Halia HB1000 or HC1000B, which is actually a 1 horsepower chiller, which is good for chilling, I think, about 1700 watts of CPU. Now, using a chiller that needs 1700 watts, can ring alarm bells. And the rest of the system we saw was just, a very basic CPU. It was populated with memory, 6-channel memory, I should add. So a lot of power was coming from the processor. The power supply being used in that system was a Corsair 1600 watt power supply.
Also a rare bird, I must say.
What, sorry?
That Corsair power supply unit is also a rare bird in workstations.
Yeah.
And actually,
it's using the high-end gallium nitride super efficient MOSFETs.
Actually think about that, because you needed to find a CPU that could hit 5 gigahertz on 28 cores. Then you needed to find a motherboard that would do it. Then you need to find a cooler, and then you need to find a power supply. And among four components, only power supply is actually something you can buy at Amazon.
Yeah, that's for sure. Because the motherboard, I managed to get a closer look on the motherboard. This was a 32-phase motherboard, of which 29 were for the CPU, 29 were for the CPU. So 1 phase per core. That's nice and expensive. That was just a prototype board. It wasn't done with any styling or whatever, because this product is still a few months away. But that board, you could tell, easily $1,000, if not $1,500 or more. Something like that is going to be extreme to the extreme. It's very prominent. It's very obvious that that the product is still a prototype. I mean, we saw a 6-channel memory. We were confirmed that it's using the server sockets LGA 3647. So this is, in essence, an overclocked Xeon Platinum 8180 or 8176. That's their super high-end $10,000 CPUs. So imagine taking a $10,000 CPU, making it, adjusting the firmware so you can overclock it, and then taking it to 5 gigahertz. That is essentially what this demo is.
And imagine how much will they charge for that processor when it hits retail.
Yeah, so the one thing that Intel didn't state was any sort of base frequency or turbo of what would be the shipping part. All they said is we can overclock to 5 gigahertz flat. Now, some people noted that, on some of the screenshots, especially with CPU-Z, you could see a 2.7 gigahertz base frequency, which ties into it being one of the Xeon Platinums, just literally a Xeon Platinum 8180K, if you will.
Keep in mind that if they say we can overclock it to 5 gigahertz, it doesn't mean
everybody else will.
Yes, it means that it will not hit 5 gigahertz for everyone, not necessarily. And the question is, will it be actually available as a processor, or it will be available only from select system makers who sell complete systems which are guaranteed to overclock to 5 gigahertz?
Well, so my takeaway is, yes, it will probably be system integrators only. Chances of it being an individual product, kind of like the FX9590 was back in the day. When that was first launched, it was just OEMs only that could only put in systems, because that ensured that the cooling was right. Whether they sell 5 gigahertz rated systems, we'll have to see. Whether this is just a Xeon Skylake scalable processor with a K added to the name, right? Intel didn't confirm any of that. The only what happened with the presentation is that everybody came away with questions that weren't obvious, and a lot of people felt that a lot of what was discussed was perhaps obfuscated, on purpose, right? So after all that, after we posted our stories, after a lot of discussion online, Intel actually gave us a ring to come and discuss, come and have extra talk with one of the engineers, and there's only 2 or 3 pressed there, 2, 3, 4 pressed there. So, and the only things that they would say on the record was, yes, we meant to say it was overclocked, unfortunately, and it was. They did say they had overclocked in the practice that morning. It just wasn't said on stage. They would confirm that it's a 14 nanometer part.
Which basically confirms that this is just a Xeon, Skylake scalable.
Yeah, they didn't say whether it was 14, 14 plus, 14 plus plus, or whatever. Though Intel has said that there will be a new Core X line of processors later in the year, which should mean Cascade Lake coming to users, whether that's as Xeons or as, well, they say Core X, so take them at the word, Core X coming. This sort of project, this 28-core project, is unlikely to be a new Core X like that. It's everybody's pretty set on it being a Skylake-based 14-plus part, which again means it's going to be power hungry. Now, like I say, it uses the same server socket. There are no consumer motherboards for that socket, so it's going to be custom motherboards from ASUS and Gigabyte for the SIs only. So SIs are going to stick their markup on it.
And the question is, how will they brand it?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some amusing names already based on the fact that it draws so much power. Basically, put Xeon plus any radioactive metal that glows. So Xeon radium, Xeon uranium, Xeon plutonium. It's going to be interesting. Now, so after we spoke with Intel, we wrote a piece. Tom's Hardware wrote a piece about it. And a couple of people did criticize me for not nailing Intel to the wall. Saying, well, this is just Intel trying to obfuscate things. This is bad PR. This isn't going the right way. And, I fully take all your criticism on board. We do speak to Intel a lot, and I would definitely say that I was the member of the press that spoke to the Intel PR team the most this week. We actively sought out Intel for very specific one-on-one discussions about what was said, about how Intel didn't really explain the story about the processor.
So basically, we were talking about what wasn't said, unfortunately. So
yeah, there are many ways that Intel could have taken this story and actually told the whole thing. It was really sort of pick and choose, and we speak to the most senior person at Intel who faces with the press, right? Can actively face with the press without needing confirmation or PR training or what have you. And we gave all of our feedback, and it was pretty extensive feedback. And it wasn't necessarily always calm feedback either. Our discussions got very heated. Now, what I said in my follow-up piece was meant to be more of a report rather than an extreme analysis, right? You can take this. You can take what they said in 2 ways. You can say, well, is it shady? Are they trying to hide it on purpose, or is it just bad planning? Is it just they're not predicting what people will say after the announcement? Now, I'm definitely one to err on the side of caution. There's a thing I like to invoke here called Hanlon's razor. Don't attribute something to malice or conspiracy that could just be attributed to bad planning or excuse the language, but cock up before conspiracy. I think this was just a case of Intel not correctly planning the response. Now, some people will say that necessarily Intel has over the recent years gone this way. They've been saying less and less about their products, and we've even said in articles Intel have been saying less and less about products, and this is perhaps another example of they didn't need to say any more. They just needed to say it in a better way. Which, it's Intel are in a sense shooting themselves in the foot with some of this, and in private, I am taking it to them, saying there are better ways to do this. You have to do it in ways which you can do it in ways that will stop all of this commotion and discussion online, because ultimately it leads to people getting a bad taste in their mouth. It leads to a negative reflection of the brand.
Oh yeah, because definitely, if you're announcing a product, you should actually announce it like you announce a product. And if you're just showing something that is essentially is a technology showcase, then call it this way. As I said, at the end of the day, 5 gigahertz and 28 cores is an achievement. It's quite an achievement.
It's when we've seen demos before that involve overclocking, it's always been announced that, hey, we're doing this with overclocking. Here's our extreme overclocker with liquid nitrogen, or here's the liquid chiller we're using, and this is the whole exact setup.
And keep in mind, guys, that we are moving from extremes to mainstream. So in a few years of time, you may see an actual product that will have that many cores running at such a high frequency.
Or more recently, a lower frequency. The idea is to explain the perspective, and I don't think Intel did it that well. Some people, really got aggressive in their responses to that, through the media. I guess was more muted, given that I had spoken extensively to Intel. I am passionate about these things. Don't let perhaps the more calmer nature of my news posts deceive that. We do speak a lot with these guys, and they speak a lot with us, both Intel and AMD. They reach out to us on these sorts of things, especially when we've got a lot to say about them, and as it was clear in the comments, everybody else does too. So Intel are gonna talk more with us as and when they want to announce more information, or how they approach what they are announcing. And as more information comes through, we'll definitely tell you what's going on as much as we can, as much as we know. Hot Chips is coming up in August, and if AMD is coming out with Threadripper 2 in the August timeframe, then chances are we'll see Intel start to talk a bit more about this product, about exactly where it stands, how it stands, what it's going to be, what are the cores, what are the core counts, what's the TDP, what are the frequencies, how this is going to be, if there's going to be lower down core count parts, or we're just going to go straight from 18 to 28 core. All of this is still unsaid. And no, I agree with a lot of you in that Intel opened itself up to too many questions. And where there are too many questions, people theorize a lot, and some of it's positive, and it just so happens that a lot of it has turned out to be negative. And we are talking about them with this. Trust me when I say this.
And in any case, what we can just summarize here is that AMD will offer 32 cores to everyone with the new Threadripper 2 platform. By contrast, Intel hasn't made it clear whether it plans to offer this processor to end users at all, or just an SI project.
Yeah, so given this time by the end of the year, when both Intel and AMD have launched their product, I will be able to go out to Amazon and buy a Threadripper 2. I may not be able to go out and buy an Intel 28 core unless it's part of a pre-built system. That's going to be an interesting shift in the market. It definitely is. So whether that's actually going to mean a shift in sales, a lot of people still trust the Intel platform regardless of what AMD's got coming out. And Extreme Workstation, if it's going to be classified as a new market segment like this, or whether it's just going to be bundled into high-end desktop, will be interesting to see. Now, if we consider, 2019, it's coming out in 2019, we're still waiting on Intel to talk more about 10 nanometer, and AMD has said that the next generation after that will be on Global Foundries 7 nanometer, and we're waiting on Global Foundries to hit high volume manufacturing on 7 nanometer for CPUs. That's going to happen sometime next year.
Well, thing is, Lisa did announce at Computex that they received their first 7 nanometer EPIC samples a while ago, so a short while ago, I suppose. And this essentially means that this CPU is at least a year away. So perhaps they are lucky and they will be able to roll out a little bit earlier. But I wouldn't expect the next gen Ryzen in early 2019.
You heard it here. That on the Intel side. So we did hear words that Intel will be launching new 14 nanometer parts for laptops end of the year called Amber Lake and Whiskey Lake. These are 4.5 watt and 15 watt parts. Get more 14 nanometer. Anton and I were talking earlier, and Anton rightly points out that if you launch a new 14 nanometer product in Q4 2018, chances are you won't launch a 10 nanometer product, and I'm using air quotes for 10 nanometer, in the first half of 2019. There's no point in launching them very soon after each other.
Well, first of all, we did hear Intel CEO saying that the company's 10 nanometer products will be available in 2019, but he didn't commit to the first half of the year. So evidently, they're coming in the second half of the year. And considering how PC makers refresh their product lineups, it means back to school at the earliest.
Back to school for everybody not in America usually means sort of Christmas time.
Well, back to school is usually from August to September,
That's right.
And typically they announce new parts, new mobile parts in August. However, this time their announcement shifted again. So really, we do understand that it's the second half of the year, and that means back to school at the earliest. So I wouldn't even expect Intel to introduce a 10 nanometer CPU lineup, not just single part or single product at Computex next year.
Yeah, I was getting mixed up between holiday season and back to school. It's been that sort of a week. So yeah, it's if AMD managed to execute on 7 nanometer across the whole stack before Intel starts getting 10 nanometer out the door.
Yeah, that will be a very funny situation.
Yeah.
But then again, if you throw away those numbers like 7 or 10, GlobalFoundries 7 nanometer and Intel's 10 nanometer have a lot of similarities. So in terms of transistor density, those process technologies are close. So 7 or 10, it doesn't mean that AMD will have a clear advantage here in terms of power, frequency, or transistor density. But from numbers point of view, AMD will be ahead of Intel.
Well, earlier in the year, we got a chance to actually visit GlobalFoundries Fab 8, where they're going to be making the next generation processors. And they were very open about the technology, and I fully expect that when the time comes, they'll want to speak about the refined details of GlobalFoundries 7 nanometer, just like Intel spoke in depth about their 14 nanometer process back in the day. Hopefully Intel again speaks about their 10 nanometer in the same way, roughly the same time. It's next year. I think Q3 is going to be an interesting time to follow. And guess what happens in the middle of Q3? It's the Hot Chips conference.
Oh, yeah.
Which is, I always like Hot Chips. It's always very technical. So I'm going to look forward to that. In terms of other things at the show, I wanted to dedicate this sort of next part of the podcast to all the other interesting parts. And speaking of Intel, I guess this is the point where we talk about Intel's anniversary processor. They announced at the keynote the Core i7-8086K. Now, this is the 40th anniversary of the 8086, Intel's first x86 processor. And they actually launched it 40 years to the day. So that was June 8th. And we're recording this on June 10th. So what makes this special? Well, Intel are going to only launch 50,000 units worldwide of this Coffee Lake-based 6-core processor, of those 50,000 units, 8,086 of which will be part of a global giveaway, which was literally you had to sign up within 24 hours after the June 8th launch, I think it was. So by the time this podcast goes out, it's definitely way too late. I know I entered it. Did you enter it, Anton?
Yes, I did.
Funny thing is, you could enter it with multiple email addresses, and there's a trick with Google. I managed to enter it 37 times.
Oh, really?
So we'll see if I even get one. But, it's an interesting tactic from Intel. Let's launch an anniversary edition part, and let's make it limited edition, and let's limit the quantity in the channel.
But how good it is a whole another story.
So the headline for this is this 8086K is Intel's very first 5 gigahertz CPU for consumers. They've done 5 gigahertz test chips in the past, but this is one that's actually coming to retail. Like I said, it's Coffee Lake based, it's 6 cores, it's basically meant to be a one-up from their current high-end mainstream parts, the Core i7-8700. We know it uses the same thermal interface as the 8700K, so if you remember a few generations ago, Intel launched Devil's Canyon.
Yes.
Which was the 4790K. That was meant to be an upgrade over that generation, but actually focused towards overclockers, so it was better binned, higher frequency, and you should be able to overclock it better. In this case, the 8086K isn't an overclocking focused part. All they've done is said, well, hey, we're going to accelerate up to 5 gigahertz. Now, to be clear on that, that's not all cores at 5 gigahertz. It's just the single core turbo goes up to 5 gigahertz. Suggested retail price is $425. That's without a cooler, obviously, compared to the i7-8700K, which I think is 369 or 389 retail.
Yes, in fact, it's sold below MSRP. So
you're looking at a $60 to $80 increase to go from the 8700K to the 8086K. If you can find one in stock, we expect these things to sell very quickly. Now, from our perspective, normally when Intel launches a processor like this, especially a high-end Halo, we get a sample in advance, we get to test it, and then on the day it actually comes out on retail, we'll post our review. This time around, Intel told us nothing. We asked them afterwards, and there are absolutely no plans to seed samples to the press for review. I think because they can assume they can sell all 50,000, so why need the extra? All I know is when I spoke to our people at Intel, they said that it was they have no review samples to send out because it was decided not to. So in order to actually test it, we had to go out and buy one. Was it yesterday morning?
Yes.
Yeah, before we had our meetings at Computex, we ran over to Guanghua Digital Plaza. I put down my credit card, and they very kindly
handed over the CPU, which is limited edition one.
Yeah, they already had stock. So what should have been a 425 USD MSRP, I picked up for 488, including tax and including a nice 2% credit card charge, which it actually still works out to be cheaper than if I'd bought it back home in the UK. So that was fun. So we bought one, and we're literally testing it now. Anton and I,
which you can hear.
If depending on how Gavin has edited this, you might be able to hear some fans in the background. That's because the system is currently running PC Mark 10 benchmarks. So I had thought that something might come out, and I should bring like a power supply, a motherboard, CPU cooler, memory. I decided my bag was too heavy before I came to Taiwan, so I took it all out. And I have to give a big thanks to ASRock here, because when I picked up the CPU, we went to the show floor, and I went around asking companies, can we borrow the hardware to test this before we go home? Now, a couple of companies said, so because it was last day of Computex is the public day, so most of the PR people go home. Either they fly back to the country, or local people, it's their day off. So I messaged around, and a few people said, well, headquarters are closed, or we're doing other things. I'm not in Taipei anymore, that sort of thing. So big thanks to ASRock. I bumped into them on the show floor, and I said, please, 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 can I borrow a system so we can do the testing? And they bust one over to me that night with a couple of RX 580s and an 8700K. So we're currently running tests now. The idea is that my script should finish its test within a few hours, I guess, and then it's just write, and hopefully by the time this podcast goes out, the review will be live. Now, we've already done, like I say, we've already done some initial testing. I've already gone through the BIOS and seen all the options, and one of the questions that came out was, well, okay, it's 5 gigahertz turbo and 4 gigahertz base, but what are all the per core turbos? And I can say now, if you've not read our review already, that all the per core turbos for this processor are the same as the 8700K except for single core. So single core goes up from 4.7 to 5.0, but the rest are the same. And this is probably why Intel didn't want to sample anybody, because now you have a $80 premium on a part that just increases the single core turbo by 300 megahertz.
And that's why it's called limited edition, probably because it has limited amount of benefits over the existing 8700K product.
It's, yeah. The minute I saw this, I kind of, my heart sank, because back when Devil's Canyon was launched, you know, all the per-core turbos got a boost, right? You actually got a significantly you got a faster product overall. Because this limited edition only goes up to 5 gigahertz on the single core, and the rest of the per-core turbos are the same, I'm expecting most of my benchmarks to actually get the same, right? Out of the 80 or so benchmarks we do, the single-threaded ones we'll see an increase, but all the multi-threaded ones we won't.
But keep in mind that actual use cases include running multiple programs at the same time. So
it's
real end users might not see that 5 gigahertz at all.
Yeah, these days, because there are so many programs in the background running, eating up a thread or two. Yeah, you can't have a single core turbo is almost meaningless these days. You need a dual core turbo to actually be quite high in order to mean something. Now, it's sad that this is the case, right? You're still using the same thermal material. It's still the same chip underneath. It might be been slightly better, but we're probably expecting to see the same overclock. I haven't had a chance to overclock it yet. That's something for me to do at 3 a.m. When the rest of the benchmarks finish.
What we do know is that one of the journalists from JagatReview deleted it and could hit 7.2 gigahertz frequency with liquid nitrogen.
Yeah, it's Alva Jonathan, or going by his overclocker name, Lucky Noob. He's a good friend of mine. We talk a lot because our background is both in extreme overclocking, and he posted pictures online, and I had a chat with him. The fact that he bought the processor himself at the same shop we did. He instantly delidded it, replaced the thermal paste with liquid metal, and he's using it for sub-zero overclocking, 7.2 gigahertz. That's great for the extreme overclockers. Skylake as an architecture and the Skylake derivatives, are probably good for around 7.4 in that space. But that's okay for extreme overclockers. What about the rest of us? Intel could have easily taken this product, added an extra 10 watts of TDP, going from 95 to 105 watts, and got a better all-around performance gain from base to all-core to 5432 core, and then still kept the 5 gigahertz single-core turbo. As it stands, I'm not expecting to see much more benefit over an 8700K, and that's why Intel is not sampling the press, because they're going to turn around and say, well, it's going to show up only on a few select benchmarks. Nobody's going to see it in the real world, and it costs $80 more. Well,
keep in mind that Intel has a refresh, has a product lineup refresh coming up in Q4, or maybe a little bit earlier, and therefore it cannot release a product that would actually rival that refresh.
So Q4, Intel has already said we're going to launch an 8-core Coffee Lake part.
Well, they will have to update 6-core parts as well.
No, I don't think that's necessarily true. It's going to be interesting if they did, but they've already said this is Coffee Lake, right? If they want to update it, they need something beyond Coffee Lake, I think. So, but you're right in the fact that an 8-core parts that's going to be the high-end product for that line, if it's a line or if it's just a few processors, that has to be a higher performance than this limited edition part. Otherwise, there's almost no point to it. You could argue that it being limited edition means that Intel is restricting the supply, so everybody has to go to the other part anyway. There are many ways to have done this. This doesn't seem to me like this would be the best way, based on what I know, which isn't, Intel knows what their roadmap is. I don't. But as it's from here, it's when the review comes out, hopefully you guys will read it I'm going to let the results do the talking, if I'm honest, because that's what we do here at AnandTech. But looking from this side of it, yeah, I'll see the numbers when the tests all finish.
Well, performance of course matters, but since only 50,000 of such CPUs will ever be made, it's likely that at some point this chip will become a valuable collectible item for those who collect CPUs. Now,
so back in the day, AMD launched the TWKR processors, which were
tweaker.
The tweaker processors, specifically for overclockers. There was only 100 given out worldwide, and given, not sold. Those are collectibles because there's only 100, and it was only given out. It wasn't sold. Only given out to select individuals, and I know some people who still have them. There are 50,000 of these, of which 8,000 are being given out, a given part of the sweepstakes. Yeah, I don't see it much of a collect. Give it 10 years for CPU collectors, yes. For now, no.
For now, if you buy a processor now, you want performance, and when it comes to performance, this guy doesn't really shine when compared to a much cheaper 8700K.
It will definitely be Intel's fastest mainstream processor to date, which is a plus. But yeah, it's how much do you value that extra increase? Now, we've spoken about Intel perhaps a bit too much now, so let's move on to the rest of Computex, which wasn't about processors. So the first product I wanted to talk about actually was the new ASUS ROG gaming smartphone. Now, we don't normally see gaming and smartphone in the same sentence. Previously, we'd seen Razer launch their Razer phone, which was a very rectangular. It was a rectangular device that was quite sharp on the edges, but it had two front-facing speakers and a 120 Hz OLED display. This ASUS ROG phone it's built like a phone. It's nice to hold in your hand if you need to use it as a phone. But its gaming credentials were that they're using the Snapdragon 845 SoC. So that's Qualcomm's highest performance SoC currently in the market, and it's in all the flagships. However, they're using it at a faster frequency than is normal. They're running it at 2.96 gigahertz rather than 2.8, which is actually the same frequency as the Snapdragon 850, which is a processor designed for always connected PCs, laptops running Windows. So this is meant to be a super fast gaming phone that's easy to hold. Like I say, it is a direct competitor to the Razer phone, but it's got much newer hardware. It's using a 90 Hz AMOLED display rather than the 120 Hz OLED. So there are trade-offs for each of those decisions. The ASUS phone will come with 8 gigabytes of DRAM in two versions, of 128 gig storage and 512 gig storage. And that means that the 8 gig DRAM with 512 gig storage is going to be nice and expensive. The screen is 6 inches at 2160 by 1080, so it's not a QHD screen. It's just a 18 by 9 version of an FHD screen. Though what I will say is, when I wrote this story up, I could have taken it in 3 different ways because there are different ways to tackle the smartphone. The one I chose, which is I think is going to be more important for smartphones in general, is that for this smartphone, ASUS decided to have an 11 millimeter thickness in Z height. Now, modern smartphones, like your Galaxy, your Apple, your LG, your HTC, they all play around in sort of the 7 to 8 millimeter thickness range. Because ASUS for this smartphone has done 11 millimeters thick, there's tons of extra volume in there, up to 50% extra volume to put more stuff. Now, more stuff means things like more battery, means better haptics, means additional ways to control the thing. In this case, it also means things like WiGig support and shoulder buttons. There's 3 Type-C connectors in the smartphone. There's definitely a 3.5 millimeter jack. So there is extra room. Now, don't get me wrong, this phone is big. I use a LG V30 Plus as my daily, and that's a big phone. But this is probably big. You will need big pockets to hold it. Now, because it's a gaming phone, the idea is that you play on it constantly, right?
Well, and for this reason, it actually comes with an external cooler and some additional external controls. in case you want to play on it on your TV, like you do on the Nintendo Switch.
Well, so what they're doing is they're bundling the cooler. They're bundling a cooler like clip-on in the box for the phone. So when you buy the phone, you get this additional cooler which has a small fan on it to help with frame rates during sustained gaming. And also the cooler, when I was holding it, it kind of cooled your hands. And if you've done a big gaming session and your hands get sweaty, you want them to cool down, and that kind of helped with that. But the idea is you've got this high-end Snapdragon, and you want top performance for an hour or 2 hours. So the idea with this is if it cools the phone down, you get better sustained performance. It also includes a Type-C and a 3.5mm jack. And the way it clips on, so if you're holding it landscape, it clips in the middle. Now, if you're holding it like you're holding, say, a console controller, you want the cables coming out of the middle. You don't want them coming out the side, as with current smartphones, because otherwise they get in the way. And so ASUS recognize this, and that's why they're bundling it in with the phone, rather than it being sold as an additional accessory. Now, on the additional accessories, there's going to be a few. So as Anton was saying, there's going to be sort of like a desktop dock to use in PC mode. There's also going to be the WiGig dock to play like the Nintendo Switch.
In fact, they said that the WiGig will be supplied with the phone, if I'm not mistaken.
No, that's going to be too expensive. They had a lot of people talking smartphones. So there's also going to be like a controller clip in, so you can have a dual screen gaming, which includes like an extra 6,000 milliamp hour battery for extended gaming. This is all. I mean, it's going to be a product. They're near final with a lot of this stuff. We're told that review units are coming September and price still TBD. We're on the list. We'll get one and we'll see how it compares to the Razer phone. Interestingly, I bought 3 phones to the show this year. I didn't bring the Razer phone, which would have been a nice comparison. But we'll get it in and we'll see what happens. Next topic to discuss is something about glitz and glamour. One of the impressive things at the show we saw was G.Skill showing off their concept DDR4 heatsinks, which they're calling their Royal. That's just a prototype name. But in standard modern RGB memory just uses like a standard diffuser to do all the sort of LED effects. What G.Skill here is doing like a crystalline structure around each of the DRAM modules.
And it looks extremely impressive, I must say.
If in the way that Swarovski crystals usually look good, and when they're done right, they can look expensive, right? They can actually look like proper precious gems. The goal here was that, G.Skill actually wanted their heatsinks to look like proper precious gems, but with RGB shining through them. And it creates an angle. It's a diffuse angled light that, it looks like there's a light shining through a gem, and it's doing, all of its angled reflections.
Yeah, it looks very impressive. And the big question is whether you can match this design with other hardware in your PC.
Yeah, so you're suggesting that somebody should have a cooler that has a crystalline, fascia with RGB LEDs or
well,
GPU.
Something like that, yeah.
I can see modders doing that, whether somebody like ASUS or Gigabyte or whoever decides to do it. I'm not so sure. Perhaps G.Skill are going to have to start up some relationships. But that was definitely one of the impressive visual things that I saw. Perhaps more on the server side for this one. Now, we've seen, Epic go into servers and enterprise and, proper professional workstations. What we haven't seen so far is Ryzen. Now, Intel's low-end workstation parts, the Xeon E3 1200 series or the upcoming Xeon E series, they're all sort of quad-core entry, but they're all designed for like microservers, and they all have management tools. They all have what's known as a BMC or an IPMI chip, an A-speed AST2500 chip with some memory, so that you can connect your networking in, and even when the system has power but is turned off, you can still manage it, and you can manage it at a distance. We've not seen that with Ryzen until the show, when Tyan was showing off their, I think it was called a Bobcat or Cougar system, which was just an AM4 socket, kind of standard layout. There are two versions, one with an integrated embedded GPU, the E8850, for the embedded market, and there's going to be one version with this A-speed BMC chip, and they said that's coming in Q3, and that was just an interesting thing that we've not seen before. Now here's one that's going to be everywhere. So ASUS's main brand for consumers is ROG, and everybody knows ROG.
Yeah.
Now for a while ROG, they have ROG normal, and now they have ROG Strix, which is kind of the entry level into gaming sort of thing. It used to be sort of like their 0 decibel brand, but they just made it into their entry level gaming. Now for years and years, they've had their TUF brand, the ultimate force. And originally it was designed for motherboards that had, extra rigidity, and it was based on, dust protection and longevity. It seems like that the TUF branding is now moving into more sort of into a more low cost type of brand for ASUS. And what ASUS has done is they've paired with quite a lot of industry level companies in terms of power supplies, in terms of memory, in terms of coolers, such that they all contain the TUF Alliance, TUF branding.
Oh, well, yeah, and that's quite impressive, I must say, because when you see hardware with similar design patterns coming out from different manufacturers.
So you can buy your TUF motherboard
from ASUS, then you buy a cooler from say Cooler Master or an Enermax, then you buy a PSU from another supplier.
And then also DRAM.
And also DRAM from G.Skill, for example.
Did we see any TUF branded cases? Not yet. Only modded.
If I'm not mistaken, Cooler Master is supposed to have them.
Okay, but they weren't showing them at the show.
Probably not, but Cooler Master was among the first to announce their
TUF branded stuff.
Yeah, their plan to join the TUF Alliance. So yeah, cases are definitely incoming, because cases are the main products for Cooler Master, basically.
It's ASUS know the value of a good brand, and it's definitely clear at this show they're trying to expand the TUF brand into something more than just 2 or 3 motherboards. I mean, there were even TUF branded laptops.
Oh yeah.
So it's not just PC components they're going with this. They're going to go across the range. Now, whether it'll work or not, ASUS and ROG Strix are known figures now. And for me, TUF has always been
TUF,
as in a TUF, TOUGH, as in it's for products that can withstand additional stress. But that's no longer the case. It's just meant to be for an entry level. So that's going to be an interesting one. Sticking with ASUS, they announced 2 products at the show, one for retail, one prototype. But the key message with both is that they have dual 2 screens. These are laptops with 2 screens each. Now, the prototype one, called Project Precog, is basically a laptop where a clamshell laptop with the normal screen, and where the keyboard would normally be, that's actually a full screen as well.
Yeah.
So it's like a book where both sides are screens. The idea here is that the bottom screen can be anything. It can be a keyboard. It can be additional controls for Adobe. It can just be a picture. It's still a prototype in the works, because having a laptop that's thin and light but also has 2 screens, that's going to draw a lot of power. They said it's going to include the Intel Movidius chip to help with AI. So the idea is that it learns your workflow. So if you bring one hand over the display, it means you're going to move something about and tap. But if you bring 2 hands over the display, you're going to type. So it shows up the keyboard automatically. Those sorts of things. Now, as everything with AI, it's all about the software. How much effort ASUS are going to put into a single product?
It's something that remains to be seen.
Yeah. I mean, you could say, well, dual screen laptops are the future, and I'm not so sure. It's if they can get the power consumption of the displays down, maybe. But
well, in fact, Intel announced displays with very low power consumptions at their end. So if ASUS decides
to use those
displays, it can actually end up with battery life that we're so familiar with.
We'll see. The thing with the keyboard is, especially as people who need to type fast to get with breaking news, I need something with some form of haptic feedback, and depressing keys is feedback. Tapping a screen isn't.
Yeah, that's for sure. And keep in mind that if you actually go with two screens that have constraints in terms of brightness or contrast ratio, then you won't be able to address all types of customers. So, for example, I need a very bright display on my laptop when I edit photos for the publication, and if it's not there, then it's.
And I need long battery life because I end up flying all across the world, and I need something that's going to be sustainable through, on the flight.
Yeah.
When I don't have a power socket, because certain airlines don't for 12 hours. It's definitely an interesting upcoming project and prototype, and they say maybe next year they'll be on the latest generation processors and they'll have something more near a retail product. But that wasn't the only thing that ASUS announced for dual screens. There's also the new ASUS ZenBook Pros. Now, what they've done here is you've got your normal screen, but your trackpad, instead of it being a pad, is now actually a 5.5-inch display as well. It's essentially like adding a smartphone to your laptop. The idea here being, well, you can still use it as a trackpad. You can put, custom pictures on it to personalize the experience, or you can use it as an extended display, so you can, drag YouTube videos down, or you can use it as a quick way to access your music player. Or when you open certain programs like Microsoft Word or Excel, not only will you use the screen pad as a trackpad, but it also has quick shortcuts for bold, italics, underline functions.
Yeah, pretty much the same you have with Apple's Touch Bar.
Yeah,
and frankly speaking, I never use it.
Yeah,
because when I type, I look at the screen, and therefore I can just use the control switch on the screen.
But you and I, we're both used to doing, bold is Control B and italics is Control I. That's natural to us. So we're not going to click on a touchpad to do it. We're just going to do it.
Of course. But maybe people who actually have to look on the keyboard when they type find this feature useful. But then again, that laptop is called ASUS ZenBook Pro, and which means that it's aimed at pros who
these people are going to spend $2,000 on a laptop.
Yeah.
So they know what they're doing, and they need something that works for them. It's interesting concept, and I could definitely see using it for personalization. And then if you need things like a music player or something, then but utility beyond that is going to be interesting, whether it's actually going to be useful for the people buying those products. Not to put a downer on ASUS, it's definitely a nice thing to do engineering-wise, which is always a plus. Also at the show, we saw a lot of discussions about next generation NAND flash. This mostly came from a meeting that we managed to synchronize kind of last minute with Maxio Technology, but this is your field, Anton.
Well, yes, as you know, Intel and Micron recently launched their SSDs for data centers, which are based on QLC memory. That kind of memory which holds 4 bits of information in one cell. So it's a new one from TLC that is used widely today. And one of the things about those drives is that both Intel and Micron aim them at applications that you write once and then read it many times. Now, so in this case, everything is fine when it comes to you don't have to rewrite that data often, and from reliability point of view, you end up with a quality drive. But when it comes to consumers, which constantly write something on the drives here and there, like download a new program or just maybe a set of pictures or whatever, then you rewrite data and the SSD wears out. So Maxio technology actually proposes to use this memory for consumer drives, unlike Intel and Micron themselves.
So what we saw was a 4 terabyte SSD using a Maxio technology controller paired with 4 terabytes of Intel 3D QLC NAND flash.
Yes.
This was they said an early prototype. The controller is pretty much done. They said the controller was actually manufactured on GlobalFoundries 14 nanometer, making the controller very small. That in itself is an interesting part of the story. But this early prototype, they said the NAND flash was good for 500 P cycles, 500 erase write cycles.
Yeah, and keep in mind that Intel itself and Micron itself said that their memory is good for 1000 P cycles.
When they first talking about it, it was 150. But the idea is that eventually when it comes to market, it's 1000.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
obviously Intel and Micron have better signal processing than Maxio does.
Well, like I say, Maxio said this was early prototypes. They're hoping for 1000 by the end of the year.
Well, but that's a lot of work that's needed to be put there. Keep in mind that Toshiba announced 1000 about a year ago for their QLC parts.
But yeah, no, actually seeing it at the show was kind of unexpected. So
yeah, but frankly speaking, I don't expect QLC to wear out quickly. But since it has 4 charges in one cell, retention might be a problem.
Yeah, just writing and keeping the data there.
Yeah.
So at the same meeting, we also saw the next generation of 3D TLC with 96 layer.
Yeah, from Micron. We already reported that Western Digital has started to ship this type of memory to their retail customers. So think flash drives, memory cards, which probably use this memory already. And at the show, we saw that Maxio technology has another prototype of an SSD based on the same controller they use for the QLC one. And Silicon Motion also has a prototype SSD based on the SM2262EN, featuring Micron's 96-layer 3D QLC memory.
So this is meant to be an additional 50% capacity per die.
Or
the same die area.
Yeah.
So
or just shrink of the die area, thus shrink of the cost. But keep in mind that Intel and Micron have to do string stacking for 96 layers, and that's a relatively new technique. I saw that actually makers of NAND will use it for 64 layer memory. I was wrong, evidently, but with 96 layers, they're clearly using it, and that adds complexities and therefore cost. So going 96 layer is inevitable, but at this point, it may not make memory necessarily cheaper.
Yeah, I mean, but both QLC and increasing layers of TLC are just two different ways to increase capacity.
Yes.
And the ultimate idea is that it will decrease cost for everybody. But obviously, first generation is usually difficult to do that sometimes.
Well, yes, but basically, all memory makers announce plans to use 96 layers and to introduce QLC with 96 layers. But the way I see it right now, it's going to take a long time before such memory hits the market in actual products.
Well, pretty much everything we see now is TLC.
Yes.
And most of that is 3D TLC.
Of course. So basically, all new high performance SSDs for the consumers for the consumer that will be released this year will be 3D TLC. And speaking of which, speaking of high performance SSDs in general, we should mention that Realtek is showing off its new RTS 5762 controllers as a show, and these controllers are meant for SSDs that will feature sequential read speed of 3.5 gigabits per second and sequential write speed of up to 3 gigabytes per second, which is basically higher performance than we see on SSDs today.
So high-end NVMe SSDs we see today, PCIe 3x4, usually around 3.2 gigabytes per second and about 3 gigabytes.
Lower than 3. 3 is actually requires you to first, when it comes to, for example, with Silicon Motion SM2262 and SM2262EN, they needed to increase frequency of the controller and introduce a new writing algorithm to hit 3 gigabytes per second. So Realtek does this out of the box with its RTS 5762. So
did they tell you how many cores the processor has, what frequency, or is it still all under?
Well, if I'm not mistaken, they probably have their own cores. At least they told me that they have proprietary cores, and
so most people use ARM cores. There's a couple of people looking into RISC-V cores. So Realtek could either be using that or...
Yes, of course. Well, they use ARM cores for some other products, so I would expect them to use the architecture, but they won't comment on what kind of architecture, whether it's ARMv8 or something else. But anyway, it's a proprietary core, and with this cores, Realtek can do pretty fast SSDs. Question is when are they set to be available, and how widely are they set to be available?
It's no doubt when they do, we'll be there and Billy will be reviewing them.
Well, because SSD suppliers already know how Silicon Motion controllers behave, how Marvell controllers behave, and so on and so on. And Realtek is a newcomer, so.
If you come in with those sort of high-end figures, people are going to be skeptical for a little while.
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. Plus, they need to test them for reliability and how well they perform over the long term, as memory tends to wear out, and so you need to apply better signal processing, and that slows you down.
Yeah.
And speaking of Marvell, and speaking of high performance in general. As we know, Marvell hasn't yet announced its new NVMe controller, so companies like Plextor, which use their ICs, have to invent a way to increase performance for their clients who want to have fast read and write speeds. So what Plextor did for the show, it built a prototype of an SSD, a prototype of a backplane, basically, that included 4 M2 SSDs, four latest M2 SSDs from Plextor, which are M9PEs, that's their name. So with 4 of such SSDs running in RAID 0, they could get 6.7 gigabytes per second sequential read speeds and up to 6.2 gigabytes per second sequential write speeds.
So this is a add-in PCIe card that can fit 4 M.2 drives.
Yes, that work in software RAID.
So we've already seen cards like this from ASUS, MSI, Gigabyte, and
HP.
Yeah. But there's something a little different with this card. I remember you saying.
Yeah, it has a Marvell PCIe switch.
Okay, so it's actually got a PCIe switch on. So normally those other cards I mentioned, they rely on the ability to the processor to bifurcate the lanes into by 4 by 4 by 4 by 4. But this uses a Marvell PCIe switch on board. Yes,
and that's the main thing. The thing is, it has several PCIe inputs, but the output is only by 8. So which basically means that the switch is the bottleneck for performance. But the good news is that you can still you don't need to use a motherboard that can that will bifurcate your PCIe.
So one of the things with the other cards is X399 has travel based on bifurcation, but this will be able to just add it in. But you said it's a by 8, so does that mean that each drive is only getting is only getting PCIe 3x2 rather than PCIe 3x4?
Well, I don't know how the drives work, but anyway, we do understand that this switch is a performance bottleneck here.
Yeah, but that's all in response to Marvell not coming out with a new PCIe controller.
Well, basically yes, but Marvell will come with a controller sooner or later, but then it will take Plextor some time to actually implement it and develop their own SSD based on.
So it means that anybody who's kind of tied into that Marvell ecosystem is kind of lagging behind a little bit.
Yes, for sure. But the question is whether people who want to buy Plextor will actually go and buy this multi-drive solution from the company, because it's still a kind of an extreme one, and obviously it will cost more than
just 4 drives individually. Yeah.
Yes, of course. But then again, you get performance which is considerably higher than performance of a single drive from Samsung, for example.
Yeah. So I mean, that's a lot of discussion about SSDs and NAND flash. I went to a few of the more sort of enterprisey booths and saw people talking about, hey, let's do the 12 terabyte and 14 terabyte hard drives. Now, I know you like doing hard drive news. You told me that you actually saw Seagate's 14 terabyte drive.
Yeah, and not only it. So basically speaking, Seagate's ASUS 14 terabyte drive is showcased at Seagate's booth, obviously, and it also was showcased at many other booths. And one of the impressive things is that, for example, ASRock Rack. Sorry, it wasn't actually ASRock Rack, it was Chenbro, showcasing the storage systems that contained 100 3.5-inch hard drives.
So, funny thing is, I went to AIC, and they had a 4U system that could hold 108.
Oh, that's even better. So imagine how many terabytes of data you can store in one of those systems. So yeah, in case of 100
drives,
100 drives, you can store
1.4 petabytes.
1.4 bytes per 4U rack. That's a lot.
Assuming that's like a JBOD and not like a RAID system.
Of course.
Yeah, so,
but the good thing is about that ASUS is that Seagate is working on more civil versions of it, for which it will sell under the Barracuda Pro brand. So 14 terabyte hard drives are coming to desktops this year.
Yeah, I know data hoarding is a thing. I've seen the subreddits. I think they'll love it. So.
Yeah, and obviously Iron Wolf 14 terabytes is coming to NAS market as well. So,
switching from storage, on the networking side, we saw new 802.11ax routers from ASUS. Now, 802.11ax is the next generation over 802.11.ac, still using the 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz bands, promising more speed, more performance. The high-end ASUS router that we saw was rated for over 10 gigabit of connectivity using, how ASUS routers do that thing that look like they've got like 8 fingers. They look like they've spawned from some sort of hell portal. Well, they were showing those on display. Looked interesting. I think the problem with 802.11ax, I mean, it's a chicken and egg thing. With you need the endpoints to be compatible with the routers, but you also need endpoints and routers. With the wireless space, we tend to see the routers come out first, which is always a plus, because I remember buying pre-N routers before I owned pre-N based devices. Same thing with AC, it's going to be the same thing with AX. That's in contrast to the Ethernet space, where we typically see ports before switches. I definitely prefer having switches first. And we had good, interesting conversations with the Quantia about multi-gig switches. When are they coming? And they promised us they'd tell us when they know more. But so that was networking. One thing I wanted to bring up is that this show, like the last couple of shows, there's been a heavy focus on RGB. RGB LEDs, they seem, any product that has them, I speak to companies and they say it's outselling our non-RGB, 70-30. So
yeah.
They add it, say a case, a $70 case, add RGBs, turn it into an $80 case, and it outsells the non-RGB case, 70-30. This is why companies are doing it. So if you don't like RGBs, I'm sorry.
Because RGB is virtually on all high-end products that will be coming out this year.
Yeah.
Whether it's a case, a cooler,
memory, graphics card, fans, power supplies,
power
SSDs.
Supplies, power supplies, and even SSDs actually. Yeah. So
people want to. It's the perception of wanting to show it off. Now, obviously, everybody asks, well, can you turn it off? And usually the answer is yes. The system that we're currently testing, this 8086K in, that we borrowed from ASRock, was full of LEDs. I managed to turn them all off, so I can sleep, except the DRAM. I didn't, I think, I'm not sure whose DRAM that is, because it's on a list somewhere. I can't see it right now, but I can't turn off the DRAM. So, but in terms of RGB stuff, one thing I saw was from InWin. So do you remember recently when Noctua announced the fans that they designed with super small clearance between the fan and the fan blade and the frame of the fan?
Yes.
The idea is that using a fan like that means that it's more efficient. You get a better airflow. Now, what InWin have done they've actually bonded the fan blades to that housing, and they've created a sub housing and it's the housing that spins. So instead of having like that really small gap that Noctua has, they've got the outside thing that spins. It's so when you put a fan in a case, you have to screw it in 4 places. Those 4 places are static, but the fan in the middle, it fully rotates the housing. So ultimately, you have 0 gap between fan blade and housing. Again, RGB up to the hill. But they said 140mm and 120mm designs called InWin Crown. That I thought was really interesting because it's kind of, I remember Noctua putting a lot of information about how this has taken a long time to research, to manufacture with precision, and then in comes InWin with something that can potentially topple it by doing something that's arguably simpler. It's going to be interesting to see. In terms of RGB,
Linely has
so I actually want to start this story, right, by spelling out the name of the product, right? Okay. And so it's the Lian Li, Strimer. Now that word, how would you pronounce it?
Strimer.
Right. So it looks like Strimer. I say it as Strimer because STRI stripe, right? Very common English word. Guess how it was said to me when I went to the booth to talk to them?
Not really.
Streamer.
So that's the thing which used to...
No, so it's meant to be for streamers because streaming is a gaming thing.
Oh.
But the problem here is that, so Lian Li is a very Asian company. They have no sort of Western employees. What they usually do is they have a PR agency, and we've worked with the one they had for years, and they've just moved to a new one. And we've worked with the new one for years as well. Unfortunately, the new PR agency suggested this name for the product. They themselves aren't Western. English is definitely their second or third language for all of them, actually. So they said, well, let's call it Streamer. Unfortunately, it didn't click that the sound using an E and the sound using an I is different. So I literally had, I was there for a 30-minute meeting this week, and I spent 25 minutes with the PR team saying, actually, no, you show this to any Westerner, anybody with English as a first language, or anybody in Europe with English as a second language, they'll see that, and it will say Strimer.
Of course.
So it'll say Strimer. So they have two options: either do a very quick rebranding, or just keep it as it is and don't worry. Because we actually wrote about this product earlier in the week, before we actually went to see the show, because we got the press release, and I read that and I went, okay, Strimer.
Yes,
that's how it's pronounced. So this is an interesting bit in the industry where there's a cultural disconnect and a language disconnect. And I really hope that these companies, if they want clarification on certain things like this, to reach out to us. I said, if you ever get any issues like this, if you ever get any ideas for names and stuff, you can run them by us. And they went, oh, really? We didn't know we could do that. It takes me 5 seconds to tell you that it's a name which doesn't work.
Well,
so the product itself was just like a RGB cable for a 24-pin.
Yeah, so it's probably they wanted to say that it streams power, perhaps.
I have no idea, but it's just a replacement 24-pin ATX cable from power supply to motherboard that has an LED tubes going along the white cables. That's all it is.
So so Lian basically has taken RGB to the extremes and brought it to a product that was never supposed to have RGB light in the first place.
Well, so we've seen RGB power supply cables before, but it's usually on the 6-pin, or the SATA, or it's never been, say, the EPS 12-volt 8-pin CPU, because that usually is hidden behind the motherboard, and it's not usually on the 24-pin because that's usually hidden behind the motherboard in the case. So the fact that they've added RGB means that they want you to put it outside the GPU. I have no idea. That being said, it was one of the more interesting things in the Lian Li booth this year, for what it's worth. I mean, 7 years ago, they were showing off a PC case that was a train. And you know how I remember that? It showed up on my Facebook feed as, you took this photo 7 years ago. So it's, Lian Li's going in interesting directions these days. I think Strimer is not a good one.
But since they are adding RGB to everything,
they have to get on the RGB train, I guess.
Yes, they have to be. They decided to get RGB to somewhere where it has never been before. And speaking of RGB in general, we should, as I said earlier, all high-end products that are coming in this year will be equipped with RGB LEDs. In the meantime, when I spoke to Corsair, they wanted to keep RGB on their premium products only. So, for example, the company's Carbide series cases will not feature RGB, at least not this year.
Because they're lower cost products.
Because of their lower cost products. And that's an interesting strategy for Corsair. In the meantime, Enermax is prepping an inexpensive computer case that will cost only $70 when it's available late this year. And that one will come equipped with 4 RGB fans.
So a $70 case with 4 RGB fans?
Yes.
We did see cases from Silverstone that were just plain, that cost about $30. So if you add 4 RGB fans to that, that brings you up near to 70. Was it really like a cheap end? Because I didn't see it, you did. Was it really like a cheap end case?
It has Windows tempered glass window.
Okay.
It has a tempered glass front, but Enermax says that not everyone likes glass on the front because it's glossy and
gets fingerprints.
Yes, gets fingerprints. So they might ship it with a grill instead. So we'll see, of course. And basically speaking, LEDs are not expensive, so you don't have to be.
They are competing in a market which is very price sensitive, though. That's the thing. So we'll see. Moving away from RGB LEDs, as fun as they are to speak about. Haha, sarcasm. There was a lot of mining on display, a lot of crypto mining, a lot of argument that, hey, you can mine with our stuff and you could, it's also good for blockchain. And we saw big mining setups, from ASUS, from MSI, from BioStar, all the companies that kind of put out mining-focused motherboards and mining-focused graphics cards. We even saw mining graphics cards being sold locally at the Digital Plaza. I wasn't expecting to see that because those things are usually sold as OEM-only type stuff. So
apparently they don't care about it in Taiwan?
That's usually the case. That's what I found. But one of the things we weren't expecting to see for mining. Now, to preface this, mining power supplies above a certain wattage have apparently been in low stock, high demand across the world for ages because of mining. Everything above, one company said they had trouble keeping anything above 800 watts in stock earlier this year because it doesn't matter if it was, gold, platinum, titanium, or even silver, bronze. It was just gone. They try and keep a stock available worldwide to cope with dips and rises and falls in demand, but they literally ran out of stock and they can't make them quick enough. So lo and behold, we actually see some power supplies on the show floor that are apparently capable of 3,000 watts.
Yeah.
We saw the first one we saw was from a company called Afox. Now, they're a sort of like a China-focused, Asia-focused brand.
Well, in fact, not really. Afox was established by Foxconn in 2008 to sell AMD-based graphics cards.
Okay.
So today, it sells both AMD and NVIDIA-based graphics cards, but I didn't see any high-end parts from them in their booth. So I assume that we're dealing with a company that is mainly focused on entry-level graphics cards. But they also sell power supplies, mini PCs, SSDs,
Memory.
and memory, not really. But, they're branching into memory as well. So it's not on their website just yet, but we did see them at Computex. So a new product for them was that 3.3 kilowatt power supply, which can support certain GPUs, and obviously it won't fit into any computer system.
This is specifically a mining power supply, and the thing is, it's double width. Imagine two power supplies bolted together, sideways, and that is essentially what this is. It looks like as if there should be two PCBs in it, though based on our pictures, it's kind of unclear whether it's two or one. You have to have two power cords going into it. There are two bundles of cables coming out of it, so it looks like two power supplies in one.
Well, no. There is one power cord, of course.
I thought, maybe it's the other one that I saw too. We also saw a 3,050 watt one from a company called Qdion,
which is a subsidiary of FSP.
Oh, is it?
Yes.
Okay, so
that's the entry-level brand for countries like China, Russia, and so on. But apparently they want to market miner-specific PSUs under this brand as well.
And that one was actually rated as 90 plus gold.
90 plus gold mentioned.
80 plus gold. Sorry.
No. It's 90 plus gold. That's exactly what it is.
Oh, okay.
So there is no such thing from ASUS Consultant as 90 plus gold. So it's their own sticker they've stuck on it. But yeah, no, these power supplies are built for miners. You get a motherboard that has 12 GPUs. Now longer only needed one power supply. Okay, Anton is just showing me the picture of the Qdion.
Oh, the Qdion. The Qdion only has one power.
Yes, and Afox definitely one.
Okay, so that 3,300 watts. So you definitely need to be living in a 240 watt. Well, actually, so the customers for this will be running, inside their own dedicated power buildings, so they can manage this no problem because they'll use transformers and what have you. But in an age where 1,500-1,600 watts used to be the max, and we've seen 2,000 watt power supplies pop up over the years. We're now just jumping another 50% just straight away into the world of 3,000 watt power supplies. You know what? We should actually get one and send it to Tracy to test. He's going to really love the ripple on those.
Oh yeah, and I wonder how efficient they actually are.
Interestingly, the Afox people, they told us the price of their power supplies, what they sell to distributors, which means that anybody who's bulk buying. Now, how much do you think a 3,300 watt power supply would cost?
Well, based on the cost of Corsair's 1.6 kilowatt power supplies, I would imagine that it should be a rather hefty amount of money.
About $800 maybe?
Perhaps.
Right. I was told that end retail price of this 3,000 watt power supply would be $250 USD.
Oh.
So how long do you think that's going to last?
Well, that's a big question.
Or how efficient do you think it's going to be?
Well, it's not going to be efficient because if it was very efficient, I suppose they would have cost considerably more.
Yeah.
As for the longevity, well, keep in mind that these guys will run at their
peak.
Basically forever.
Yeah.
I mean, throughout their whole lifetime.
It's actually so. Given how long, say, the hard drive industry has been around, we always get updates on, the longevity of hard drives from people like Cloudflare, and and servers and data centers. They tell us, they say, how their servers last, because the mining industry is still young in the sense that 2-3 years young. We don't necessarily hear about the turnaround times of parts other than graphics cards. We don't hear about how often they have to place power supplies, or DRAM, or the CPUs, or the coolers. So, yeah, as interesting as a 3,000 watt power supply is, I don't think I'd be confident in buying one if I ran a mining data center, really.
It depends. If you are running actually mining data center, well, maybe you should consider different options.
I was speaking to Corsair, and they said their 1,600 watt power supply, they had so many orders from miners that they just can't keep them in stock. They just can't make them quick enough. So you've got that end of the spectrum where they're willing to pay for the hyper efficiency, and you've got this end of the spectrum where they're willing to pay, for a cheaper product. So who knows? Speaking of mining, we walked past an interesting booth on the last day, which is actually the first ever meeting I've been able to hand over to Anton, because it's a meeting we could have only had in Russian.
Yeah, because that's the company which has a lot of Russian engineers. It's actually not necessarily based in Russia, because they have offices in Latvia, they have offices in Germany, and in some other countries. So what they make are the first liquid cooled mining systems. So they were showing two of them. But their product lineup includes more. The first system is just a huge box like a desktop that holds graphics cards and cools them using liquid. So
is that eight? That was 8 graphics cards in what is essentially like
if I'm not mistaken, yes.
So it's bigger than a normal desktop. Imagine sort of Corsair 1000D type size, but slightly shorter lengthways.
Yeah.
And then slightly taller on top, and sort of all metal chassis. And the picture they had in their brochure had a cat on it, because they said these are sort of like for home use, right?
Yeah, of course. So you basically just bring it home, install it, and start to mine.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have any hard drives in it. So everything is USB.
It's a turnkey solution.
Yes, it's a turnkey solution. You can control it from an app, on your smartphone, and you immediately see how it mines and how you get Enricher. And
mining with graphics cards, as much as that is worth anything.
But, apparently they also showcase in the more industrial stuff. So the one which is aimed at mining data centers. So what they managed to do is they managed to fit in 16 graphics cards in a 4U rack.
Normally a 4U will hold about 8 or 10. Right?
Yes, at best.
Air-cooled.
Yes, at best. But these guys have built their own cooling system with their own water blocks for everyone. They worked with ASUS on custom motherboard, and they will be working with ASUS on custom graphics cards for this. And
so the point is, if I remember correctly, the cooler water block used is designed for 2 graphics cards each?
Yes, and it can remove 450 watts
total.
Total.
So we kind of saw these sort of. If anybody remembers back in the day when Nvidia used to have two GPUs in the same card, there was two variants. It was a GTX 295, I think. There were two variants. There was one where you had just two GPUs on the same PCB, and there was another where you had two PCBs with the same kind of air cooler. And there were water blocks for that, where you could put just the two PCBs, two chips onto a single water block, and that's how that was built. This is essentially the same thing, but for more modern situations.
Yeah. So, but they use a lot of custom hardware, of course, and the key thing is that they can put in 16 cards per 4U box, and that's scanned for record.
Yeah.
Because
I also noticed that they were the only people on the show floor to actually running their mining systems at full blast.
Yes.
Because when I went to ASUS, when I went to MSI, when I went to BioStar, they weren't necessarily powered on because they were afraid they were going to blow power breakers. I mean, you have companies using graphics cards in a show floor. I mean, the show floors are designed to hold events like this, but not necessarily use all that power. But these guys were actually doing it, and all the water tubes from their server were going into a radiator in another room.
Yes, and
keeping it 31 degrees, if I remember correctly.
Yes, something like that. But what matters is that extreme density plus each 4U box can be unplugged from the rack without actually any interruption. So they have a special mounting mechanism for
quick connectors to water cooling.
For quick connectors to water coolers. So once if they see that a GPU failed, they don't need to stop the entire rack, but they need to just take out the box which contains a faulty GPU and replace it and put it back in. So if you are running a mining data center, the company called Camino is at your service.
Yeah. So I mean, we're almost up to 2 hours in this podcast. So I think we'll kind of end it there. I've still got quite a few pieces to write up as we say this, and
we'll be doing later today.
I literally know your car's coming to pick you up soon to take you to the airport to fly home. So safe travels, Anton.
Thank you.
And thank you, all you guys, for listening. Again, come to AnandTech to read your content. We love to have you. Thanks for listening.
Bye.